The clock on the first-floor landing had stopped at 11:42. Constance noticed it the way she noticed most things. Without moving her face, without slowing her step, filing it somewhere she could not name yet. 3 members of staff passed her in the entrance hall before Mrs. Briggs reached the bottom of the stairs. Not one of them looked up. She had arrived at Hallwick on a Tuesday in October with 1 trunk, 1 letter of introduction, and the composure of a woman who had long since learned that being useful was its own form of disappearing. Her father owed documented sums to unforgiving men. Lord Pharaoh had a large estate and no immediate family. The arrangement had been explained as a kindness. Carefully, gently, with great attention to that particular word. She had smiled at exactly the right moment. She was practiced at that. "His lordship is resting," Mrs. Briggs said, as she led her upstairs. "He has good days and quieter ones. Today has been a selection." Manageable. The house was larger than she had expected, and quieter than 14 staff had any right to allow. Not the quiet of emptiness, the kind that had been practiced, over many years, into something resembling habit. She was given a room. Tea arrived and went cold. At dinner, a table set for 4, occupied by 3. She met Mr. Dowell, the family solicitor, who spoke entirely in qualifications, and Mrs. Agnes Hollis, who smiled with the precise warmth of a woman who had decided long ago exactly how much of herself to distribute and to whom. Lord Pharaoh did not appear. Neither did the man Constance had seen at the top of the stairs on her arrival. Reading a letter, back to the hall, making no movement that suggested her presence was anything other than unremarkable. No one mentioned either of them. Later, passing the landing on her way to bed, she stopped in front of the clock. 11:42. She thought about winding it. Her hand did not move. She went to her room and lay awake, listening to the house settle, wondering if the silence had always been this deliberate. The next morning, Constance woke before the household stirred and found, in the small sitting room adjacent to her own, a stack of correspondence left on the writing desk and apparently forgotten. She did not read the letters. She read the account ledger beneath them. She had been looking at the 1826 entries for perhaps 20 minutes when Lord Pharaoh appeared in the doorway. He was older than she had expected. Smaller, somehow. He looked at her with clear, direct eyes. "Margaret," he said, "you are up early." Constance set down the ledger. Behind him, a housemaid appeared in the corridor. Saw, understood, and withdrew without a word. As though this were a known sequence, as though there were an established procedure for it. "Good morning, my lord," Constance said. He smiled, gently, with recognition, and moved on. She sat in the silence he left behind. Then she picked up the ledger and found the page she had been on. 16 payments. London, 1826. All to the same address. She was still looking at them when the door opened again and James Pharaoh walked in. He stopped when he saw the ledger in her hands. "What did you find?" he said. "Not." "What are you doing?" "Not." "That isn't yours." "What did you find?" Constance looked at him for a moment. "I don't yet know," she said. He did not tell her to stop. He crossed to the window and stood with his back to her, looking out at the garden. He said nothing further. Neither did she. Outside, the garden was very still. She turned the page. That afternoon, Mrs. Briggs brought tea to the conservatory without being asked, and then, with the instinct of someone who had been useful in this house for 30 years, lingered long enough to pour, not long enough to hear anything. "Your father," James said, when she was gone. "What does he owe?" It was not a question. Constance looked at him. "Enough," she said. "Enough to send you here." "Yes." He was quiet for a moment. Outside, wind moved through the kitchen garden. A door somewhere in the east wing banged once and did not bang again. "I was away for 6 years," he said finally. "I came back in March. My father." He stopped. Began again, differently. "The physician from London, the one in the accounts. His name was Hale. He treated patients the family wanted treated quietly." Constance set down her cup. "Treated," she said. That is the word the family used. The conservatory was warm. Too warm for October. The kind of warmth that accumulates behind glass and has nowhere to go. "There was a woman named Margaret," Constance said. "Your father called me." "My sister." He said it flatly. "She died in 1827. 11 months after the payments began. Constance did not move. The cup was still in her hands. She realized she had no idea how long she had been holding it. Was she ill? She said. Something crossed his face. Not grief. She had seen grief and knew its geography. Something older. Something that had already been folded away many times and had developed, through practice, very precise creases. She was inconvenient, he said. Then, I should not have told you that. He stood. Mrs. Briggs chose this exact moment to reappear with a second pot of tea, her expression entirely unreadable, her timing impeccable, her presence making further conversation impossible. Constance watched him go. The question she had not yet asked sat in the room after him like smoke. The conversation with Mr. Dowell occurred the following morning in the entrance hall, which Agnes Hollis entered approximately 2 minutes after it began. Miss Ashford has been finding her feet, Agnes said, with a warmth directed at both of them equally, the specific kind designed to diminish one party in the other's estimation. The house is a great deal for a newcomer, particularly one unaccustomed to. A small pause. Establishments of this scale. She has been asking questions. Agnes continued, pleasantly. About the family. About the estate's history. I find it charming. That quality some young women have of wanting to understand things before they are quite equipped to. She let that land. Then she turned to Constance with every appearance of genuine affection. You must let us answer your questions properly, my dear, rather than rummaging through old papers. Some of what you would find there requires context you simply don't have yet. Constance said, Of course, Mrs. Hollis. Thank you. She said it with exactly the right degree of meekness. She had been raised to produce that tone on demand. That evening, Lord Farrow emerged for dinner. He spoke very little. At one point he looked toward Agnes and said, quietly, Eleanor. Agnes went perfectly still. It lasted perhaps 2 seconds. Then she turned to Lord Farrow and said, in a low, even voice, Yes, I'm here. She patted his hand. She did not look up. The table continued. Constance looked at her plate and did not write down what she had seen. She did not need to. 2 days later, an ordinary morning by all appearances, Mrs. Briggs knocked on Constance's door and said that his lordship was asking for her. She found him in the back garden in the weak October light, standing among the rose beds with his hands clasped behind his back. He was entirely himself. That was the only way to describe it. He walked her along the path, naming each variety, pointing out where a drainage problem had been corrected in 1831 and what it had cost. He asked her opinion of the eastern border and listened with the attentive stillness of someone who was genuinely interested. At the far end of the garden he stopped. Margaret planted these, he said. The white ones. She did not like red. Said red roses were for people who wanted to be impressive. A pause. She wanted to be comfortable. There is a difference. She sounds remarkable, Constance said. She was. He turned to go. Then, over his shoulder, without any change in his voice, You remind me of her. Not in the way everyone thinks. In the way that matters. He went inside. That evening, James appeared at the door of the sitting room. He did not knock. He stood in the frame. He spoke to you today, he said. Yes, clearly, entirely. He absorbed this. The face of a man recalibrating something he had assumed was settled. He has 4 or 5 such days in a month, James said. Perhaps fewer. And the rest? He did not answer that. He looked at the ledger she had left on the side table, and his jaw did something small and involuntary. The payments in 1826, she said. They were made from the estate accounts. Your signature is not on them. No, he said. But you knew. The silence that followed was very long. The candle between them burned lower than it should have, and neither of them moved. I was 19, he said finally. She waited. He did not say anything else. Mr. Dowell arrived from London the following Wednesday with new documents and the expression of a man who had been asked to resolve something and had found upon arrival that it was not resolvable. He requested a private meeting with Constance. She sat across from him in the morning room and listened to him explain, in his careful, qualified way, that the engagement, though not yet formalized, required a decision within weeks. Lord Farrow's health made a prolonged arrangement impractical, The estate's future hinged on settled succession, and he said, lowering his voice, there were parties with an interest in contesting Lord Pharaoh's mental competence if the matter were not resolved before that question became, his word, conspicuous. Who are these parties? Constance asked. Mr. Dowell's eyes moved briefly to the door. It would not be helpful, he said, to speculate. She walked to her room afterward and stood at the window for a long time. The mathematics of it were simple. She had always been good at mathematics. If she stayed, she entered a household built on a buried truth, became mortar pressed into the cracks. If she left, her father's debt came due in a way that had no good outcome. She thought about Margaret, who had wanted to be comfortable. She thought about the physician from London and what comfortable had cost her. That afternoon, Agnes appeared at her door with the demeanor of a woman delivering good news. I thought you should know, she said, that I mentioned to Mr. Dowell your considerable interest in the family's financial history. The smile was kind, specific, immovable. He did ask why a prospective bride would require such detailed acquaintance with the accounts. I assured him it was only natural curiosity. I do hope I said the right thing. She left. Constance sat on the edge of the bed. Somewhere below, the front door opened and closed. Footsteps crossed the hall. Then silence. She counted them, without meaning to. 12 steps from the door to the foot of the stairs. She had absolutely counted. She doesn't know yet whether the truth will save her or bury her. Stay with her. She found him on the second floor, in front of a door she had not seen opened. He was standing with one hand on the frame, not quite touching the wood. He heard her on the stairs and turned. His expression was unguarded in a way she had not seen before. It lasted 3 seconds. Then it closed. This was her room, he said. Constance stopped on the step below him. I haven't been inside. In 18 years. He looked at the door. I came back in March because my father was deteriorating and there were legal matters. That is what I told myself. A pause. That is not entirely why I came back. The landing was very quiet. Outside, rain had begun. She could hear it on the stone sills, filling the silence between them with something that was almost useful. I should have. He started. He stopped. She waited. He moved his hand from the door frame, and whatever he had been about to say went with it. She did not ask him to finish the sentence. She was not yet sure she was prepared for the answer. The following morning, she came downstairs to find Mr. Dowell's traveling coat on the hall stand and his valise already at the door. Agnes was with him in the morning room. The door was not quite closed. Concern among the staff. Agnes was saying in her low, carrying voice. Questions about his lordship's competence. Who benefits from such questions, Mr. Dowell, is something I leave entirely to your judgment. Constance did not go in. She stood in the corridor and understood, very precisely, what had happened. Mrs. Briggs had mentioned that Constance was asking about Margaret. Agnes had taken that information and built something with it. Something useful. Mr. Dowell appeared in the doorway a few minutes later. He looked at Constance with the expression of a man who had made a decision and found it easier than he had expected. I think, he said carefully, that it may be best for all parties if you were to return to London within the week. The arrangement can be quietly set aside. These things happen. He did not wait for her response. Agnes appeared behind him. Her face was composed, warm, entirely at rest. Only her hands, clasped very tightly at her waist, the knuckles faint white, suggested anything else. Lord Pharaoh appeared at the top of the stairs. He looked down at the entrance hall. Eleanor, he said to Agnes. Agnes's hands tightened. Yes, she said quietly. I'm here. She did not look at Constance. She did not need to. Constance went to her room and stood at the window for a very long time. The mathematics were still simple. They had only changed in their conclusion. If she left quietly, her father's debt still fell due. There was nothing to soften it now, no arrangement to negotiate against. She had spent 3 weeks in a household that had swallowed the gamble without acknowledgement. She thought about Margaret, who had also been a solution to a problem. She thought about the physician from London and how solutions in this house tended to conclude. She began to pack. She was folding the last dress when she heard footsteps stop outside her door. A knock, not deferential, decisive. James came in. He looked at the trunk, then at her. Dowell told you, she said. Dowell told me what Agnes told him. His voice was very even, which was not the same thing. It was close enough to serve its purpose. Yes, he looked at the window. My father has money held separately from the estate. My mother's settlement, never touched. There is a legal arrangement that would transfer a portion of it independent of the estate succession question. It doesn't require the engagement to proceed. He paused. It doesn't require anything from you. Constance turned to look at him. Why? She said. He didn't answer immediately. He looked at the trunk, at the folded dress on top. I knew what was happening in 1826, he said. I was 19, and I went to Edinburgh, and I told myself there was nothing to be done, that she was all ready, that it was all ready. He stopped. I have told myself many things about that year. She waited. I would like, he said, to do one thing that is not that. The landing clock would have marked the silence if it had still been keeping time. It was not. Constance looked at him for a long moment. She thought about what she was choosing and what she was releasing. She thought about all 3 doors she had walked up to in these 3 weeks, and which one she had opened and which she had stood before, not quite touching the wood. I'll stay until the end of the week, she said. While Dowell's review is arranged, he nodded. He said nothing further. She almost said something. The sentence was entirely formed. She looked at him. At the set of his jaw, at the way he was looking at her coat, hanging by the door as though he had no particular feelings about it in either direction. And she did not say it. She turned back to the trunk. She began to unpack. That evening he came to find her and said without explanation, "Come with me." She followed him upstairs. He stopped in front of the door on the 2nd floor, and this time he opened it. Margaret's room was small and very ordinary. A narrow bed, a writing table with nothing on it, a window overlooking the garden. The rose beds, the white ones, just visible in the dusk. On the writing table, a single dried flower, pressed flat, the color long gone out of it, not placed for effect. Left, she thought. Left the way you leave something when you do not know whether you are coming back. James stood in the doorway. He did not go in. She stood beside him. Neither of them spoke. The room was very quiet. The garden below had gone dark. The white roses were almost invisible, but almost was not entirely, and she found she was grateful for that particular almost. She became aware at some point that his hand was very near hers. She did not move. Neither did he. The candle she had carried guttered once in the draught from the door, steadied, and burned on. By Thursday, the county knew that Mr. Dowell had extended his stay at Hallwick. By Friday, it knew that an independent assessment had been commissioned. Not regarding Lord Pharaoh's competence, it was stressed, but regarding the estate's financial administration. Everyone understood these were not the same thing, which meant everyone understood precisely what was being looked at. Agnes Hollis remained. There was no reason to remove her. She had done nothing that could be named. But when Mr. Dowell requested the household accounts for the previous 12 years, he directed the request not to Agnes but to the housekeeper. Mrs. Briggs said nothing about this, so she simply brought the ledgers. 2 days before Constance was due to leave. The arrangement had been quietly transformed into a visit. The visit had a return date, and the return date had not yet been discussed. James found her in the back garden. The roses were still there. The white ones. He stood beside her, and neither of them said anything for a while. "You will go back to London," he said. "Yes. And then?" She looked at the roses. "And then, I expect, you will write a very correct and properly formatted letter to my father." He was quiet. She could see at the edge of her vision that he was looking at her rather than at the garden. "I would prefer," he said, "to deliver it in person." She did not answer immediately. She thought about what it meant to be seen. Not as a solution to someone else's arrangement, but as the specific person she actually was. The one who read ledgers when no one was watching, who counted ceiling beams to manage her own fear, who had stood in a dead woman's room and felt something she had not yet found words for. That, she said, would be acceptable. The unspoken sentence had lived between them for 3 weeks. It had not been said. It did not need to be said. She found, somewhat to her surprise, that she understood it entirely. The following October, Mrs. Briggs wrote to her former acquaintance in Berkshire that Hallwick had changed considerably. The rose beds had been replanted. Not dramatically, but with intention. Someone had taken particular interest in the eastern border. The drainage problem had been addressed properly at last. Lord Pharaoh had 3 good days in the previous week. On one of them, he had asked to see the accounts, reviewed them in silence, set them down, looked at the window, and said, "Good." No one was entirely sure what he meant. No one asked. On the 1st floor landing, the wall where the clock had stood showed a pale rectangle, the shadow of something that had been there a long time. No one had painted over it. Constance passed it every morning. She had stopped counting the days since she had arrived. She was not certain exactly when she had stopped. She did not particularly need to know. If you have ever stood in a doorway, not quite touching the wood, knowing that opening it changes everything, waiting anyway. This story was yours. Some truths cannot be spoken. They can only be stood beside until, at last, they no longer need to be said.